The jewels they could not kill. I still remember the first time I saw the photograph. A grainy, black and white image, taken in a cramped Ekaterinburg basement sometime in 1918. At first glance, it looked like a routine Bolshevik inspection photograph: uniforms, stern faces, and rifles leaning against a cracked wall. But then I noticed something strange in the middle of the frame: a small wooden table piled with glittering objects. Not arranged neatly, but dumped carelessly, angrily. Diamonds, pearls, rubies, cold, lifeless, and thrown down like evidence of a crime. And that's when I learned the truth that would pull me into this century-old mystery. The Romanovs, Russia's last imperial family, were executed with gemstones sewn into their clothing. Not a few. Not hidden in pockets. Sewn into corsets, seams, undergarments, and jackets. Layers of jewels, stitched into fabric like makeshift armor. Or maybe like hope. Hope that someone, somewhere, someday, would survive. As I studied the photograph, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just an image. It was a confession. A whisper from history saying, "We didn't find everything." Because even in that picture, one that was meant to show what the Bolsheviks seized, there were too many gaps. Too many missing objects that should have been there but weren't. And that's where our story begins. The basement of blood and treasure. On the night of July 16, 1918, the Romanov family was awakened around 2 a.m. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and their young son Alexei were told they were being moved due to unrest in the city. They believed it. They had heard gunfire all evening. But it was a lie. They were led into a small basement room in the Ipatiev house, what the guards called the house of special purpose. The walls were white. The room was hot. The windows were painted shut. And then, the gunfire began. What the Bolsheviks did not expect was that the children would not die easily. Because the girls, especially the older ones, had sewn diamonds and precious stones into their underclothes, hundreds of carats in total, creating a kind of accidental bulletproof vest. When bullets struck them, some ricocheted. Others lodged shallowly. The guards grew frantic, confused. They didn't know the jewels were there. They didn't know the Romanovs, stripped of power but not of loyalty, had tried to preserve something bigger than themselves. A legacy. A future. A last lifeline of wealth that might help them survive if escape ever became possible. But survival didn't come. After the massacre, the guards stripped the bodies and made the first discovery. Dozens of gemstones spilled onto the floor like rain. Diamonds glittered in puddles of blood. Pearls rolled under boots. It was a sight even hardened soldiers never forgot. And it was only the beginning. The official inventory that never matched. We are told today that the Bolsheviks recovered the Romanov jewels. But that is not true. They recovered some. Enough to write reports. Enough to claim victory. Enough to show Moscow that the mission was complete. But the numbers don't add up. Imperial Russia recorded the Romanov collection meticulously. The Tsarina alone owned more than 600 pieces. Crowns, tiaras, necklaces, pendants, brooches, and extravagant pieces gifted by generations of emperors. After the family's execution, the Bolsheviks claimed they recovered fewer than 150. Where were the rest? Where was the diamond-studded Kokoshnik tiara Alexandra wore in 1903? Where was her beloved imperial pearl cascade, a necklace she never traveled without? Where was the Grand Imperial Pendant, one of the largest pink diamonds in Europe? None of these appear in Bolshevik inventories, and none have ever been found. Officially, the explanation is simple: they weren't with the family at the time of their execution. But unofficially, even Lenin knew something was wrong. Private telegrams suggest Moscow suspected guards had stolen pieces. Others feared the family had smuggled jewels out long before their capture. Still others believed the Ural Bolsheviks, already known for corruption, sold treasures on the black market. The truth. Lost in silence, fear, and dirty hands. The discovery that started the legend. In the weeks after the execution, guards conducted dozens of searches around the imperative house. They dug under floors. They tore apart furniture. They rummaged through garden soil. The Romanovs' clothing was burned, washed, and cut open. And every day brought more discoveries. A ruby sewn into a sleeve. A diamond hidden in a button. A sapphire found inside a corset bone. It felt like the jewels were haunting the killers, refusing to disappear quietly. And yet, there were always rumors of jewels still missing. Pieces never accounted for. Guards seen with new money. Strange visitors moving through Ekaterinburg with bulging pockets. Even today, descendants of certain Bolshevik soldiers tell stories of family heirlooms, massive diamonds, antique pendants they were warned never to display openly. Some claim they came from the Romanovs. Most deny it. All are afraid to admit the truth. The moment I knew this was more than a story. Years ago, while researching another case in London, I visited a private jewelry historian. Hidden inside a felt-lined drawer, he revealed a necklace, platinum, set with old-cut diamonds that sparkled like frozen fire. It surfaced in Paris in 1928, he told me. No record of ownership before that year. I examined the craftsmanship, the cut, the metal. It was Russian, Imperial Russian, early 20th century. Do you know whose it was? I asked. He hesitated. There are only two possible answers, he said, and both are dangerous. He never told me the name, but he didn't need to. My hands were shaking, because I knew in that moment that the Romanov jewels, or at least some of them, had not vanished. They had simply changed owners. Quietly, illegally, forever. As I left the historian's office that evening, he stopped me at the door. Before you go, he said, take this. He handed me a small, sealed envelope, yellowed, stiff, and brittle around the corners. On the front was a handwritten note. Recovered near the imperative house, July 1918. Inside was a single photograph. A guard, a cart, and something wrapped tightly under a canvas sheet. Something unmistakably shaped like a locked chest. That was the moment I realized. The Romanovs' missing jewels didn't vanish in the night. Someone took them. And someone knew exactly what they were worth. And that chest, whatever was inside it, was never logged, never reported, and never seen again. Not officially. Our investigation begins with that chest. Because if we find who moved it, we might just uncover who stole the Romanov fortune. The chest that should not exist. I didn't sleep the night I found that photograph. I tried. I really did. But something about that image, the guard, the cart, the canvas-covered chest, stirred a restlessness in me that felt almost physical, like a hand pressing down on my shoulder, refusing to let me look away. It wasn't just the existence of the chest that bothered me. It was the date written on the envelope. Recovered near the imperative house, July 1918. The Romanovs were executed in July 1918, which meant the chest appeared within days, maybe hours, of the murders. So here's the question that wouldn't leave me alone. If the Bolsheviks were so determined to seize all Romanov valuables, why was this chest not included in any official inventory? Why was it being moved in secret, at night, guarded by a man whose face was half hidden in shadow? Why was the chest never mentioned again? And most importantly, what was inside it? The basement, the bodies, and the search that wasn't honest. To understand that chest, we need to step back into the chaos that followed the Romanov execution. Most versions of this story focus on the night itself, but the aftermath, that's where the truth rotted in the dark. After the killing, the guards spent days, returning to the basement to strip the bodies of clothing, cut open seams, tear through fabric, and shake loose the jewels that were hidden inside. Every sweep of the search brought more discoveries. Diamonds the size of corn kernels. Sapphires sewn into lining. Pearls stitched into neckline seams. Rubies tucked under corset frames. Some guards said the jewels sounded like pebbles hitting the floor. Others said it sounded like rain. It took them multiple passes to find most of the jewels, but not all. Because if they found everything, the inventories would match the historical record. And they don't. Not even close. You don't lose entire royal tiaras and legendary diamonds unless someone wanted them lost. But let me tell you something few people know. The men who guarded the Romanovs were not loyal ideologues. They were not elite soldiers. They were not trustworthy by any modern standard. They were desperate men, some thieves, some drinkers, some barely literate, chosen because they weren't expected to question orders. They were chosen because they were disposable. Which brings us back to that chest. The guard with the hidden past. The man in the photograph was identified in a faint penciled note on the back. P. Vaganov. That name means nothing to most people. But to historians of the Russian Revolution, it means trouble. Vaganov was one of the Bolshevik guards assigned to the Ipatiev house. He was known for two things. He hated the Romanovs. He loved money. A dangerous combination. What makes Vaganov even more interesting is this. Just days after the execution, he disappeared from Ekaterinburg. No resignation. No reassignment. No records. Gone. Vanished like smoke. Historians debate his fate. Some say he was killed by fellow Bolsheviks to keep him quiet. Others claim he defected and fled east, carrying with him certain items he believed would secure his future. But here's the part that chills me every time. Multiple witnesses later reported seeing Vaganov carrying a heavy chest out of the Ipatiev house yard the morning after the execution. A chest. A chest that shouldn't exist. A chest that shows up in the photograph I now held in my trembling hands. The chest in the photograph. Was it the same one? I couldn't prove it. Not yet. But the weight of the possibility pressed into my thoughts like a secret trying to surface. The missing files. I wasn't the first person to suspect a secret transfer of jewels. In 1995, a Russian archivist named Dr. Irina Melnikova uncovered a series of documents that were curiously marked, restricted, do not copy. These were communications between local Bolshevik commanders and Moscow. Most concerned routine transport of goods, prisoners, or supplies. But one file, just one, was different. It mentioned an unlisted consignment sent out of Ekaterinburg shortly after the execution. No description. No content list. No signatures. Just the order to transport and the confirmation of receipt. Except the confirmation was redacted. Entire paragraphs were blacked out. In 1995, Irina tried to publish her findings. Within weeks, her access to that archive was revoked. Within months, she retired early under medical stress. When a journalist later asked her if the mystery consignment might contain jewels, she answered with one cryptic sentence. Some things were never meant to be itemized. So now think about this. A guard known for greed. A chest seen leaving the Ipatiev house. A missing inventory. A hidden Soviet file describing an unlisted shipment. This wasn't rumor anymore. This was a pattern. A pattern that pointed toward the truth. Someone removed Romanov treasures before Moscow ever saw them. And maybe that someone didn't survive long enough to enjoy them. The Vaganov theory. There is one story, told only in whispers, that keeps resurfacing. Years after the revolution, in the 1930s, a jewel dealer in Shanghai claimed he once handled diamonds from a murdered Russian emperor. He said the man who sold them spoke little Russian, looked terrified, and kept glancing over his shoulder as if he expected someone to burst into the room at any moment. The man's name? He never gave it. But the description? It matched Vaganov. Same build. Same scar near the eye. Same accent from the Ural region. Coincidence? Maybe. But combined with the missing records, the redacted files, the chest and the photograph, coincidence starts to feel like denial. And if Vaganov did smuggle jewels out, he couldn't have done it alone. Which brings us to the question that will shape the rest of this investigation. Who helped him? Because someone had to turn a chest full of world-famous imperial jewels into untraceable black market stones. Someone with connections. Someone with power. Someone whose name history has conveniently forgotten. A name that changed everything. 2 weeks after receiving the photograph, I returned to the historian in London. I needed answers. I needed clarity. I needed something more than rumors. He didn't speak at first. He just slid a thin piece of paper across the table. A shipping manifest. Handwritten. Barely legible. On it was a list of cargo transported from Ekaterinburg to an unknown location in July 1918. Only one line wasn't crossed out. Consignment number 24, Escort P. Vaganov. But that wasn't the part that made my breath catch. At the bottom of the page, signed in dark ink, was a name I recognized instantly. A name tied to lies, betrayals, and political brutality. A name that should not be connected to the Romanov jewels at all. Yakov Yurovsky. The man who personally oversaw the family's execution. Why was his signature on a document linked to Vaganov's secret shipment? Why did he personally authorize the consignment? And what exactly was he trying to hide? The chest was no longer the mystery. The mystery was why the executioner himself was involved in moving it. The executioner's secret. I stared at Yurovsky's signature so long my eyes blurred. His name felt radioactive on the page, something dangerous, something that shouldn't be handled barehanded. Yakov Yurovsky wasn't just any figure in this story. He was the man history points to as the central architect of the Romanov execution. The one who organized the firing squad. The one who carried the pistol. The one who made sure there were no loose ends. And now his name appeared on a shipping manifest connected to a mysterious chest that left the Ipativ house in the days after the murders. The man who killed the Romanovs also moved something out of Ekaterinburg in secret? Why? What did he fear? Or, more chilling, what did he desire? The deeper I looked, the more I realized. This wasn't just a theft. It was a cover-up. And Yurovsky was at the center of it. The executioner who needed to prove loyalty. To understand the weight of that signature, you need to know who Yakov Yurovsky really was. He wasn't born into power. He wasn't a natural leader. He wasn't even particularly well-liked among his comrades. He was a man who clawed his way into authority, driven by ideology, yes, but also by resentment. The Romanovs represented everything he believed was rotten in Russia, everything he felt excluded from, and everything he wanted to destroy. But there's another truth people forget. Yurovsky was terrified of failing. Terrified that Moscow would question his competence. Terrified that any soldier might betray him. Terrified that the Romanovs, or their wealth, might escape his control. So when he organized the execution, he wasn't just completing an assignment. He was building a reputation. Every action he took afterward, burning clothes, burying bodies, destroying evidence, was done with one purpose: prove absolute loyalty to the Bolshevik leadership. And yet, something happened in those days after the killing that doesn't align with a loyal servant. Why would a man desperate to impress Lenin and Sverdlov quietly approve a shipment that never appeared in official records? Unless he wasn't moving the chest for Moscow. Unless he was moving it away from them. The testimony they tried to bury. Decades later, pieces of the truth began resurfacing. In 1964, a retired Soviet archivist, long dead now, recorded an interview about her time managing early revolutionary files. She spoke of documents that did not match the public narrative. And she described one recurring problem. The inventories of Romanov possessions never aligned with the lists we received from Yurovsky. Each time we questioned him, he insisted his soldiers had lost nothing. Yet the central government often complained that jewels they expected never arrived. Expected never arrived. Hidden somewhere in that gap, between expected and received, is a century-old crime. It wasn't just Vaganov stealing. It wasn't just guards pocketing gemstones. Someone higher, someone in control, was manipulating the flow of treasure. Evidence was missing. Records were missing. Entire shipments disappeared. And the only person with authority to approve those shipments was Yurovsky. What was going on? This wasn't a few greedy guards stuffing diamonds into boots. This was systematic, coordinated, planned. The night the numbers stopped making sense. When the Bolsheviks seized imperial property across Russia, they sent everything to Moscow for appraisal. Every item was weighed, measured, and catalogued. Nothing was supposed to slip through the cracks. But in the days after the Romanov execution, something strange happened. The numbers stopped making sense. Moscow requested lists from Ekaterinburg. Ekaterinburg sent incomplete reports. Moscow demanded clarifications. Ekaterinburg stalled, delayed, and insisted a full inventory was forthcoming. That full inventory never came. Instead, Yurovsky personally delivered a small collection of jewels, far smaller than what imperial records showed the Romanovs possessed. At the same time, guards were suddenly seen with new money. Stolen stones were quietly appearing in black markets. Foreign dealers reported a sudden influx of Russian diamonds. And in the middle of all this chaos, a chest vanished from the Ipatiev house. A chest signed off by Yurovsky. A chest escorted by Vaganov. A chest that did not appear in a single Soviet report. The last witness. The most unsettling clue comes from a 1935 interrogation file discovered after the Soviet collapse. It's the testimony of a man named Anton S., one of the laborers forced to help dig through the Ipatiev house grounds after the murders. His written statement includes one line historians still argue about. I was instructed to look away when Comrade Yurovsky and two guards loaded a heavy crate onto a wagon. I heard him say, "This does not exist. Do not speak of it. This does not exist." Those 4 words became a whisper passed from worker to worker. A dangerous phrase. A forbidden truth. And every time it resurfaced, someone involved seemed to disappear. Anton S. himself died mysteriously under questioning, according to the file. His testimony, preserved only by accident, should have been destroyed. But it survived. And now, as I held Yurovsky's signature in one hand and Anton's words in the other, a picture began to form. Yurovsky didn't just oversee the execution. He oversaw the disappearance of imperial wealth. But why? Fear. Profit. Orders from someone higher? A private agenda? Each possibility opened new doors, darker ones. But one path kept rising to the surface. The idea that Yurovsky and Vaganov were not enemies, but accomplices. Asterisk, asterisk. And if 2 men worked together, there had to be a third. Someone with the authority to approve escape routes. Someone with connections to smugglers. Someone who could make priceless jewels vanish from state records. Someone whose name the Soviets worked very hard to scrub from history. I didn't find that name on a Soviet document. I found it somewhere far more unexpected. In an American auction catalog. The auction that wasn't supposed to happen. 2 weeks after discovering Yurovsky's signature, I received a lead from a researcher in New York. He claimed an old Christie's auction file included a mysterious lot from the 1920s, origin unknown, seller unnamed, provenance erased. The item? A diamond brooch unmistakably identical to one worn by Empress Alexandra in multiple imperial portraits. How did a Romanov jewel end up in a New York auction house only a few years after the murders? Who sold it? Who transported it? And why was the seller described only as a former Russian official seeking anonymity? The name on that file? A single initial. A single letter that changed the entire direction of this investigation. Why? Not just Yurovsky, but someone even higher. Someone whose power extended beyond Russia. Someone whose hands were deep in the disappearance of imperial treasure. Someone who knew the secrets the Soviet Union spent decades trying to erase. The next chapter isn't just about theft. It's about conspiracy. And the man at the center of it may have been the most dangerous figure in the early Soviet world. The man who never should have been involved. That single initial, Y, haunted me. Handwritten in careful script on a Christie's auction record, it sat there like a ghost, hovering between truth and danger. It wasn't enough to make an accusation, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. Because in early Soviet Russia, there were only a handful of powerful men whose names began with Y. And only one of them had the authority, reach, and cold-blooded ambition to secretly move imperial jewels out of the country. Not Yurovsky, not Yakov Sverdlov, not even Yagoda, who came later. No, the identity behind that letter was far more unsettling. It pointed directly to a man whose fingerprints appear on nearly every dark corner of the Russian Revolution, Yevgeny Petrovich Yelagin. Most people have never heard his name. That's not accidental. He doesn't appear in school history books. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a famous revolutionary. He wasn't executed publicly or celebrated later. He operated in the shadows. A bureaucrat. A financial officer, a logistics controller, one of the quiet men whose paperwork moved armies, resources, and money. Men like Yelagin don't make speeches. They make decisions. Silent ones. Deadly ones. The paper trail that almost disappeared. The deeper I dug, the more I found strange inconsistencies surrounding Yelagin. He was in charge of resource transfers across the Urals in 1918, the same period the Romanovs were held and killed. He had operational control over unlisted shipments, anything designated special priority. He oversaw transport routes that connected Ekaterinburg to clandestine smuggling channels along the Siberian border. 3 documented shipments under his authority vanished without explanation between 1917 and 1919. Every single one of those disappearances happened along the same railway line Vaganov is rumored to have used. And then there is the strangest clue of all. A note scrawled in the margin of a confiscated Bolshevik ledger, written decades later by an anonymous archivist. Yelagin was the only one with clearance to approve unscheduled consignments. Yurovsky relied on him. That alone would be enough to raise suspicion. But there's something even more alarming. Yelagin is the only Ural region official from 1918 whose file contains 17 missing pages. Pages that were removed sometime during the Stalin era and never replaced. Pages labeled financial movements, special transfers, and private exchanges. That is not coincidence. That is erasure. Someone wanted the world to forget him. And someone wanted his connection to the Romanovs to disappear along with those pages. The New York lead. So I reached out to the researcher who discovered the Y in the Christie's file. He sent me a photograph of the original catalog entry, yellowed with age but perfectly legible. Lot 49, diamond brooch with floral mounting. Provenance, former Russian official seeking anonymity. Initial, Y. Estimated origin, early 20th century imperial atelier. The brooch was unmistakably Empress Alexandra's. The pieces around it were sold anonymously. Most were purchased by wealthy American buyers who had no idea what they were holding. But the question that matters is this. How does a Soviet bureaucrat smuggle a Romanov jewel into New York only a few years after the family's execution? It would require safe passage out of Russia, contacts in Europe, a black market jeweler capable of recutting stones, a Western buyer, a laundering system to disguise provenance, and protection from Soviet intelligence. That list eliminates almost everyone involved in Ural regional operations, except Yelagin. Because Yelagin had something the others didn't. He wasn't an ideologue. He was an opportunist. And opportunists always follow the same religion. Money. What the archives revealed. Months into my investigation, I received a heavily redacted file from a Russian historian working out of Perm. Inside were fragments of correspondence between Yelagin and unnamed foreign associates. Most letters were deliberately vague, but a few sentences survived the censors. Payment confirmed. Item will arrive as planned. Shipment from Y has cleared the border. Proceed with recutting. Ensure stones lose recognizable patterns. Clients demand anonymity. Recutting. Anonymity. Shipment. This wasn't oil, or textiles, or information. This was jewelry. High-value stones lose their identity when recut. They become new, untraceable, silent, just like the missing Romanov diamonds. The betrayal that changed everything. In 1920, Yelagin abruptly defected. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye. He slipped out of Russia through Manchuria and resurfaced in Paris a year later, living under a false name. From there, he vanished again, leaving behind rumors of lavish parties, expensive jewelry transactions, and secret meetings with international dealers. One Paris jeweler later confessed that a thin, severe Russian man approached him with loose stones he could not have legally possessed. The man's name? He refused to give it. But his initials? YPY. Yevgeny Petrovich Yelagin. By the time French authorities began looking for him, he had disappeared permanently. No body, no grave, no confirmed sighting. A ghost. A thief. And potentially, the highest-ranking Soviet official involved in the disappearance of the Romanov jewels. The Yurovsky-Yelagin connection. At first, I assumed Yelagin and Yurovsky were working against each other. One ideological, one corrupt. But the documents told a different story. Yurovsky controlled the crime scene. Yelagin controlled the transport routes. Together, they had access, authority, opportunity. A shared motive: use the jewels as personal leverage in a revolution full of shifting power. The more I examined their movements, the clearer it became. The disappearance of Romanov jewels wasn't a spontaneous act of theft. It was a coordinated extraction. ***. An operation. A quiet one. Protected from the top. And if this was an operation, someone else had to be involved. Someone capable of arranging sales overseas. Someone who could guarantee that these jewels entered the Western market clean. Someone with deep political influence in early Soviet foreign affairs. And I knew exactly where to look. Because the next clue wasn't in Russia. It wasn't in Europe. It was buried in a dusty record inside the U.S. National Archives. A record that was never meant to see the light of day. Inside a U.S. diplomatic file dated 1921, stamped "Confidential," I found a short report describing an unusual request made by a former Russian official seeking entry into the United States. The applicant's initials? YPY. But it wasn't the initials that made my heart stop. It was the item declared in his confiscated luggage. Loose gemstones of unknown Russian origin. And below that, one pendant containing an uncut pink diamond resembling known imperial catalog pieces. The Grand Imperial Pendant. Missing since 1918. Thought lost forever. Smuggled. Recut. Almost entering the United States. And stopped only because someone tipped off U.S. officials. But who? And why? Who wanted to protect the Romanov legacy? And who wanted to erase it? Blood on the walls, secrets in the pockets. I stepped deeper into the dim hallway of the Ipatiev house, the place where the Romanovs spent their final night. Even now, more than a century later, the air feels heavy, like the walls still remember the sounds they're trying to forget. I pause, letting the silence tell its story. Because what came next wasn't just execution. It wasn't just revolution. It wasn't just revenge. It was confusion, panic, and discovery. The scene that changed everything. Hours after the gunfire, after the shouting, after the choking smoke, the Bolshevik guards stood over the bodies with one mission. Strip them of anything valuable. The order came straight from Yurovsky. Collect everything. Every item. Every jewel. They thought it would be quick. But it wasn't. Because the Romanovs had done something extraordinary and desperate. Something no one in the execution squad expected. As one guard rolled over the body of Tatiana, his knife snagged on something thick beneath her corset. He pulled at it, confused, and that's when the fabric tore open. Diamonds spilled onto the floor. Dozens. Then hundreds. Each one catching the lamplight like a tiny burst of sunlight in that dark basement. The guards staggered back and shouted. The room froze. According to testimony recorded decades later, even the hardened Bolshevik soldiers were stunned. These weren't ordinary jewels. These were imperial-grade diamonds, perfectly cut, blinding in clarity, and worth a fortune then, and an unimaginable sum now. And Tatiana wasn't the only one. Anastasia, Maria, Olga, even Alexandra. All of them had gemstones sewn into their undergarments, packed and layered like makeshift armor plates. The jewels hadn't saved them, but in death, they revealed a secret the guards didn't know they were walking into. A precious armor. I try to picture it, the quiet nights in captivity, the sisters huddled together, whispering, sewing gemstones into the seams of their corsets. No needles allowed. No tools. They used whatever they could find, tiny pieces of wire, broken bits of hairpins. And all the while, the guards watched them with suspicion, not knowing these young women were hiding a treasure worth more than the entire town they were imprisoned in. The Romanovs knew danger was closing in. They didn't know when, but they knew something was coming. And so the jewels became their last hope, insurance, protection, maybe even bargaining power. It's heartbreaking to think about. They were preparing for escape. They were preparing for survival. They were preparing for a future they would never see. And the guards, brutal men hardened by revolution, now found themselves standing in a basement filled with bodies and diamonds. A fortune at their feet. That moment changed everything. Chaos among the killers. Witness accounts suggest that the executioners weren't unified after the shooting. The diamonds created cracks, friction, greed. Some wanted to follow orders. Some wanted a cut. Some wanted all of it. And that's when the lies began. The official Bolshevik report claims the jewels were collected and secured. But off the record, things were very different. One guard, years later in his confession, claimed he saw another soldier pocket handfuls of diamonds when he thought no one was looking. Another said he saw a commander slip a pearl necklace into his boot. Another claimed small rubies vanished before they were ever logged. No two stories match perfectly. The only thing they all agree on is this. Not everything made it into the official inventory. Not everything stayed under government control. Not everything was recorded. And that's how the mystery was born. The night ride. After stripping the bodies, the guards wrapped the jewels in cloth sacks and carried them out into the night. The trucks waiting outside rattled violently as they drove over the uneven ground, leaving the house behind, leaving a crime scene that would become one of the most infamous in history. But something else happened on that drive. According to records from the 1930s, one truck stopped halfway to the mine where the bodies were dumped. A flat tire, they said. But the timing? Too convenient. If someone wanted to pocket a few items, if someone wanted to quietly remove a pouch from a crate, that would have been the moment. No witnesses. No officers. No questions. And from that night forward, gaps appear in the records. Diamonds unaccounted for. Earrings logged but never confirmed. A tiara that vanished entirely. History was rewriting itself in real time, and no one realized it. A discovery that shouldn't exist. Years later, a British jeweler would quietly acquire a Romanov diamond, cut in a style that had been lost since the early 1900s. He never revealed his source. In the 1960s, an American collector purchased a sapphire brooch traced back to Alexandra's personal collection. It had no export papers. And in the 1990s, a Swiss vault opened to reveal a gold Romanov pendant experts had believed destroyed. Where did these pieces come from? No official Soviet archive mentioned them. No British royal records tracked them. No auction houses claimed provenance. Which leads to the chilling question. Did the jewels really disappear that night, or were they quietly sold, traded, hidden, and scattered across the world? The first real clue. As I stand in the doorway of the room where the Romanov daughters slept their last nights, I notice something subtle on the floor, a beam of light catching the faintest glint of silver. It reminds me of a discovery made decades later in this very house. A metal button. Not just any button. A button from a guard's tunic. Found near a crack in the floorboards. And through forensic testing, experts discovered trace elements of diamond dust embedded in the fibers. Diamond dust, from stones being cut, broken, or crushed. Why would a guard's button contain diamond fragments? That question leads to the next chapter, and reveals a truth so shocking, it changed the direction of the investigation forever. If the guards were breaking diamonds on sight, what were they trying to hide? And who ordered them to destroy imperial jewels worth a king's ransom? Join us in our next video to unravel the first major suspect, and the first cover-up attempt tied to the missing Romanov fortune. Thanks for watching our videos.